Tuesday. I'm a day behind if you're doing the study with me. I had a real rough day yesterday. The bus someone sat too close to me and was coughing on me, and it's very stressful. So I didn't get to finish everything, but I was glad I did because I got to take a break and assimilate everything that I had been learning about. And so Psalm 88 is really, really a dark place. Like, if you've ever been in a dark place in your life, read Psalm 88 because there are so many things here. Several times in verses 6 through 8, he blames God. He is blatantly like, look, you've thrown me into a pit. You forgot me. Your anger weighs me down. Your negative waves engulf me. Like, he is literally throwing it out at God and saying, God, like, seriously, what are you doing to me? Even to the point where in verse 18, he's like, you have taken from me friend and neighbor. And the last line is, darkness is my closest friend. I think we've all felt that at some point in our lives. Feeling like our continuous cries for help are met with seeming silence, right? So we're sitting there, we're crying out to God, we're trying to keep the faith in this completely dark, terrifying, difficult situation. And it's hard. And the thing is, this is so weird because in verse 11, this completely took me off guard that I had to do a lot more research in it. It says, is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? So the psalmist, he's just like so down. And he's like, God, why are you doing this to me? Like, really, is your love displayed in these negative places? And often we feel that way. And it's interesting because it takes the word destruction. Destruction comes from the Hebrew word abandon, which looks like abandon, but it means angel of death. But there's also Greek Apollyon, the destroyer. Another translation was bottomless pit or abyss. All right, and it's interesting to think, yes, the psalmist is asking this in like a very deep, dark, like almost I'm mad at you, God sense. But he's also kind of foreshadowing the future. So if you take that verse 11, is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? And you may take that question and make it a statement. You declared love in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction. What does that sound like? That sounds like Jesus, right? He declared his love in the grave when he died for us on the cross, and his faithfulness and destruction, that he would be willing to do that for us at that point. And this writer I was learning from, his name's J.C. Philpott. He says in there, he's like, if the Lord suffered his servant to die so that the divine promise would be fulfilled, that's why it had to be possible for his faithfulness to be proclaimed. So sometimes when we get in those dark places and that destruction and this pain that we don't know how to deal with, and it doesn't make sense at time, but if you think like the biblical phoenix, right, it had to die and then rise from the ashes. Without death, there could be no voice from the grave. There couldn't be that resurrection. There couldn't be our salvation. And when it talks about like, man, in that deep darkness, that's our sin. Right? And that's the last of all places fit for the loving kindness of our all-prayer God. Right? We're in that black pit of sin and darkness and death, and we feel that way. But a lot of times, when do we see God's faithfulness the most? Is in those times of destruction, is when he is working, when we claim our absolute dependence on him. And he says it again, J.C. Philpott, I love how he puts this. Of all God's mercies, his greatest have been those that seemed at the time to be the greatest miseries. The richest blessings in which he has given us are those which comes wrapped up in the outside covering of curses. His faithfulness has been as much or more manifested in destruction than in restoration. And I know that when it's going through these tough times, like, number one, can't see the light, right? It's incredibly hard, and we're trying to keep our eyes on you and rest in his promises and trust in his goodness and loving kindness, and it's so hard, and that's why it's important to have like that backbone of spiritual and faith and those sorts of things, and also positive people surrounding you that are faith filled, that can help you in your journey. But also, those are our greatest testimonies. You know, the Bible says, when I am weak, he is strong. But also, God takes every single one of those things that challenge us and he makes them into something beautiful. And those things that challenge us become our testimonies, right? So, you know, a lot of you know me about speaking about mental health. And a lot of times, you know, those times that I made attempts to end my life, they didn't occur, they didn't exist because God had a bigger plan for my life. And he's using that misery, using that time to help me minister to others, to show them the light. There's this new song, Christian song now, to glow in the dark. I love it. But I would have never seen that in those dark times. And we don't ever know what God's doing with that destruction, with that grave, so to speak. We never know that when we're going to get reborn, we're going to get resurrection, we're going to get pulled from that pit. And interestingly enough, even though if you read it, it's like basically all a lament, you know, it's all complaining, but that's also a prayer. When you're bringing yourself to God, you're petitioning, you're asking the God for comfort. You know, yeah, you might be yelling at him, but you're praying and you're trusting in him and you're asking him and you're still there. You know, and there's that song, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So what's my immediate reaction? And how can I garner a godly response? And it's remembering those things like James 2:23. Your faith even calls you a friend of God. Matthew 28:20, I am with you always. Hebrews 13:5, I will never fail you or abandon you. And it's hard in those deep, dark moments to remember these things and to actually believe them. But it's important, and one thing I've been working on myself is that when I can look back and see how God's acted in my life, taking those moments, ingesting those feelings, and pulling them back up when I'm at a struggling point. You know, something that happened, I call it a miracle, was that like we were moving and we didn't know where our money was going to come from. We didn't know how we were going to buy food, where we were going to have to put on the credit card. Like, it was this big thing, and my tax return came back that day that I was having those feelings, and that's a miracle to me. So now when I think about those things, like, I can't help but think of how God worked in that way. I can't help but think of when God had saved me so many times from death and destruction. You know, and it's hard. It's hard to see his life in those dark places and the light, right? But we have to think of the Son of God. You know, I was thinking on Easter Sunday, when you think of the Son, S-U-N, and Son, S-O-N, like Sunday, like that's huge. And even Job, it's paralleling Psalm 88, but Job in 19:25, he says, but as for me, no matter all this other crap going on, I'm still praying, I'm keeping the faith, and I know that my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. So time and time again, and this is that cycle that I talked about earlier, things are going wrong, we go to the Lord, we know that eventually it's going to come back, and he's going to redeem us, and he's going to restore us and give us the life that we need, and he's also going to use that to help someone else. And that's the ministry, like at church on Sunday, we are called to do. We're called to shine a light in other people's lives, to reach out, to share our stories so that we can help others see the light and the love of Jesus through the work he's doing in our lives. So whenever you're in that place, turn that question from, is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction, to he is declaring love in the grave, and his faithfulness is declared in destruction. I know it's easy for me to say right now because I'm in an okay place. But I know that I have this written down to remind me of that when I get to this space, that this psalmist, Psalm 88, he knows where I'm feeling and he knows it, but he's still going to God. And I can repeat that prayer, that same prayer that Psalm 88, to my God who loves me and cares about me. And he will take me to his favor and his goodness again.